Get started. Thank you, Drew. The September 26th meeting of the Sonoma County Technical Advisory Committee. We will, as always, start with introductions.
Tony Bertolero, City of Sebastopol.
Edie Takata, City of Rohnert Park.
Good afternoon, Greg Scott, City of Cotati.
Elizabeth Tyree, Sonoma County Regional Parks.
Steve Urbanek, 400 Aviation Boulevard.
The palatial suites of 400.
Peter Rupert, SCTA, RCPA.
Rob Sprinkle, City Santa Rosa.
Never Laughlin, Sonoma County Public Infrastructure.
Neither Daho, SBI.
Ashley Cotter, City of Sonoma.
Derek Montani, City of Cloverdale.
Shauna Gauze, SCTA, RCPA.
Larry Zimmers, City of Healdsburg, and we have Drew behind the curtain.
And on the screen.
Oh, yes, and on the screen.
Marga Ocanias, SCTA.
Chris Barney, SCTA, RCPA.
Adam Garcia, SCTA, RCPA.
And as well, we have Tarina Wilson from the Santa Rosa. And yeah, that's it.
Welcome, everyone. And Chris, just so you know, if something was going on with your mic, we could barely hear you if you have to speak later. All right.
Oh, we're missing Petaluma and Santa Rosa for voting.
Santa Rosa.
Santa Rosa, I'm sorry, Rob.
Windsor.
Oh, my gosh.
I'll vote for Petaluma.
That's my bad.
You looking for Nancy?
No, no, I was just looking at the sides and not right in front of me.
With that, next is public comment, but did we have any, doesn't look like we have anyone from the public. And then approval of meeting minutes from the August 22nd meeting. Does anyone have any changes? Seeing none, we'll assume those are passing unanimously. On to item 4, the comprehensive transportation plan, Sonoma Moves 2050 project update.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. That's me. Hopefully my mic is sounding better.
Better.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just give a quick update on outreach engagement and then talk a little bit about the project list from the CTP. So on outreach and engagement, we have a bilingual survey that's out and available right now. We've included a QR code and link in the agenda packet after the item on the project list. So our intention for the survey is to gather information on current transportation priorities and needs. And we've built on the survey we released as part of the last CTP so we can kind of track changing priorities over time. We're also working on scheduling a virtual town hall meeting on October 22nd in the evening. So it's going to be an interactive event from 6 to 7:30. So we'll present on what the CTP is, talk about the survey, outreach, provide some information on progress we're making on achieving our goals, and have some interactive portions as well. So looking forward to that. So with that, let me go ahead and move on to a discussion on the CTP project list. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Start this. So as I've mentioned over the past few months, we're embarking on an update to our comprehensive transportation plan. So that includes many different components, including engagement, updating some baseline information and reference information in the plan. But a big part of the CTP is the project list. So many of you have been involved in this in the past. The CTP project list is financially unconstrained. And there are a number of different reasons we do that, but we're breaking the project list update into a few different pieces. One is looking at the existing projects that are in the adopted CTP. And then we'll be looking at new CTP projects in coming months. So you can see on the slide here that we have almost 300 existing projects in the CTP across these different project categories. It's over $10 billion in identified needs. So one thing I would mention is that in the CTP, projects under 1 million in estimated cost, we include in programmatic categories or buckets of like projects for different jurisdictions, different project types. So there are a number of different reasons why we track projects in the CDP. One is to identify transportation needs and priorities. So they're on the radar and they can be identified for future funding and make it easier to allocate and go after grant funding. As part of the CTP, we also evaluate for our future transportation system performance. So in the CTP, we look at an aggregate or all of the future projects together. And part of this is actually keeping our travel model up to date that is actually used beyond the CTP analysis. It's used to analyze local plans and projects as well. So it's important that we have a good idea of what project priorities are out there so we can represent those in our tools for our CDP, but also for these additional analyses. MTC, our regional partners, also require that we maintain a project list that can feed major regional projects into the regional transportation plan and other regional transportation planning documents. And we're also required to maintain an updated policy and planning document to help guide our programming process at SCTA. So I mentioned before that we're going to be using a two-step process as part of this update. So first, looking at existing projects that are in the CTP, and then later in October, issuing a call for new CTP projects. So we'll be providing a project spreadsheet to each of your jurisdictions to review that will include project information for the projects that are already in the CTP. And projects with project costs of less than 1 million, I mentioned before, will be represented in programmatic categories. So one of the first things we'd like you to do is to identify if the project should be carried forward into the new CTP. So as projects are constructed and completed, they should drop off the CTP project list, or if they're no longer priorities, just let us know as well, and we can remove those. And then there are spaces in the project review spreadsheet to update contact information, update the project name, the project description and location, type of project, cost, and the amount and source of identified funding. And please pay attention to the contact information. So we may have questions as we try and code this into our tools. So it's important to have someone that will have good information on those so we can represent them correctly as we're going forward. So for this first phase, we'll be getting those review spreadsheets out in the next week or so, and are requesting that you respond back by October 31st of this year. So here's a quick look at our CTP project list update for the next year. So we're working on updating the existing project information now through the end of October. We'll issue a call for new CTP projects at the next TAC meeting. So we're working on an updated form for that now. We'll work on compiling that information and having a draft updated CTP project list early next year. And then using that information, we'll do some analysis and do our countywide kind of high-level performance assessment next spring. The programming and projects team at SCTA will be issuing and working on the SCTA funding program cycle 2 call for projects next summer. So the work you're doing updating CTP projects can flow into that. And then one thing we'll be doing as part of the CTP update is developing a short-term implementation plan, really looking at what we can achieve in the next 10 years. And so that'll really build off the CTP project list and the funding program cycle 2 call for projects. So with all of that, we'll be working on this over the next just about a year and looking at completing the final CDP by the end of next year. So I've included one-page instruction sheet in the agenda packet, and also I apologize, a very small example of the project review spreadsheet, but we'll get actual Excel files out to everyone early next week. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things back over to you, Mr. Chair, and happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
Does anyone have any questions for Chris? Yes.
I have a question regarding, if you could explain a little bit further what you meant by programmatic for projects that are under $1 million.
Yeah, so one of the ways we've done this in the past is we've taken a look at, bicycle pedestrian projects or smaller projects and grouped those together in the CTP. So one example would be, the bicycle and pedestrian projects under 1 million for the city of Sonoma. We'd group those together into one category and have that as one single line item in the CTP. So as most of you know, we're updating the active transportation plan right now. So we can actually work with the list that's being developed for those active transportation plans to come up with, that subcategory as well. But there may be, small maintenance projects or other small projects that could be grouped into a category in the CTP as well.
Are they programmatic and under 1 million or programmatic or under 1 million? Meaning like if you've got a standard bike type project or something really simple that would have previously fallen under programmatic that may be over 1 million, because it doesn't take much to hit 1 million.
Yeah, I would, if it's a large program, not specifically a project over 1 million, I'd identify that separately. For example, a maintenance program would fall in under that category.
Well, I think since this was prepared a few years ago, that some of our costs have gone up, and so we'll push some of our projects into the over 1 million now.
Yeah.
A lot. And a lot of, what normally would be programmatic, because I think in the past, even like pavement rehab or whatever was considered programmatic, but many of those projects would now push 1 million and wouldn't be programmatic. We're not going to have nearly the amount, I think. And that's going to be a bigger burden for us to make sure we got those projects in there, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for that comment. And if it would be helpful to talk through some of the specifics, let me know. We can schedule a call to look at, what's in there right now and how that could be reconfigured based on updated costs and information.
And I have a question, Chris, on one of the links that you provided in supporting documents. It wasn't working for me. It was letter D, the way to search the project list. I know that you have everything listed under C, but I wasn't able to open up the link on D.
All right, I'll make sure that's working and we'll get an updated link out to the group. If you go to our website and go to the CTP section, there is a tab underneath there that'll take you to the searchable project list as well.
Any other questions for Chris?
Yeah,
Please.
Yeah, so Craig Scott Katati, what's the main disadvantage if a city has a project and it is not on the list? I understand the CTP list is to give an idea of, the needs of roadway projects, bike ped projects countywide. But is there a critical flaw if a city fails to have a project put on that list?
Yeah, I could see two disadvantages. One is, if it's something that you would like to eventually be eligible for regional funding and show up in the regional transportation plan, it really does need to be in the CTP to kind of move in that direction. I think another disadvantage is if you're using our travel model or tools to evaluate and do environmental work for your own planning documents or other project documents in your jurisdiction, if there's a major or important project that's not included in the CTP and doesn't make it into those tools, that could be a blind spot in those tools when that evaluation is being done.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
And this is a, please remind me question. Was this the same process where we had where the TAC and the board discussed assessment criteria and one of them was economic, and that was a big economic, how does this transportation project contribute to economic vitality? Was this the same process? Does that sound familiar? And the reason I ask that is because as we start to look in our jurisdiction at those questions, if it's the same process, some projects kind of fell off because, well, they didn't meet this sort of criteria. So remind me, is that, Chris, do you remember that?
Yeah, last time this was the CTP project updates and call for projects was tied more to the Measure M funding program, and Shauna or David could speak to that as well. So that's going to be, that process will be more housed in that SCTA funding program cycle 2 work coming next summer. So there's a slight difference in this process than we used last time.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Anyone else? One last quick question, Chris. What, and I should know this, but what is the cycle for doing this? When will it be done again? With the thought that if there is a project that's pretty far out on the horizon, whether or not to include it.
We update the CTP every 4 or 5 years. So yeah, if there's something far out, you know, we'll be doing this again in at least 4 or 5 years. So there are plenty of chances.
If it's greater than 6, it's okay to leave off. If not, put it in.
Yeah, unless you think it really needs to be included in the analysis tools, you know, if that would cause problems for environmental work in your jurisdiction, I'd, you know, include something. So there's something in there.
Yeah, good point. Like if it's a major interchange work,
right,
going to have an impact, we'd want to include it.
Yeah, or if it's called out in your general plans, you know, something like that, a major project should be included.
Or maybe your 10-year CIP.
Yeah. All right. If there's nothing else, we will move on. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Item number 5, the SCTA VMT Mitigation Banking and Exchange Program.
That's me as well. So this will be a brief update. So the VMT mitigation program project is going on and ongoing. We have a technical advisory committee formed for that group. And we met in September to discuss the project. It was a well-attended meeting. We had over 20 people in attendance, so there's a lot of interest in this going forward. At the first meeting, we covered the program goals, the outreach plan, key issues, VMT reducing projects, and then project administration and setup. So there's a little bit of homework associated with that group. One is to review and add preliminary project ideas for VMT reducing projects. So we worked on developing a first pass at that list at that meeting and sent out a draft to the TAC members to take a look at and add to. So looking for feedback on that. And then the TAC will be meeting in November to talk more about those potential VMT reducing projects. How to evaluate VMT mitigation effectiveness, and talk about potential pilot and demonstration project ideas and options. But that's the update. Happy to provide any additional information or pass information along from the TAC meeting if anyone is interested in that.
Right, thank you. Item number 6, measures M and Go Sonoma, 6.1 invoicing.
That's me, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Included in your agenda packet is an invoicing and obligation status report that we include every month. It's informational. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know.
On to 6.2, the Measure M annual reporting letter status.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is also an informational item. I would like to note that there is one letter that is shown as outstanding. That letter has since been received. So all the letters for the annual reporting have been received and logged, and we will be moving on to production of the Measure M annual report. In the meantime, thank you all for getting your reporting in. This informational item will also be presented to the Citizens Advisory Committee and the SCTA Board.
Anyone have questions on 6.1 or 6.2? 6.3, the Go Sonoma Strategic Implementation Plan Proposed Policy Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one has a little bit more meat. It is an action item, so we will be looking for a recommendation from the TAC to the board. So as background, you all recall that we held a competitive program or competitive call for projects for the SCTA funding program. We evaluated all the projects that we received. We scored them. We awarded some projects and some projects did not receive funding. So now it has come to our attention that some of the projects that are that were selected for funding would like to change their scope. And because those projects were evaluated and judged against other projects, we felt that it was important to have guidance on how that can occur. So we have taken the policy 4.19, which was already in existence, and added some information to that includes guidance on how a project that has already been evaluated and awarded funding can move forward with a scope change. So you can see that that information has been attached. All of the new text is in red. Hopefully everyone has had an opportunity to look through it. So we are proposing essentially that some basic information be provided in order for us to evaluate what has changed and if the benefits and costs will be affected by the scope change that is being proposed. We will then, SCTA staff will then evaluate and then make a recommendation to the board once that information is provided. So with that, I would hand it back over to you for any questions.
Does anyone have questions? Yes, please.
Question and comment. Regarding the scope change, I think I mentioned to you that, I mean, I understand if you're increasing the scope, you know, obviously, you'd need to bring that up and also get that through for further approval, even if you're not requesting any additional funding, right? Because you can't. However, I guess my concern is if you're down scoping your project because let's say you go out to bid, and that's happened to us lots of times, right? You go out to bid, the costs are just quite high. And so you have to down scope certain things in order to have a better match for the grant and the funding that you have available. So I was a little concerned about it seemed a little burdensome to have to go through a process to get that approved, because you could say, well, it's not approved because you can't reduce your, let's say your lineal footage by a certain amount because that's too big a scope change or whatever the reason is. And so that was the one that I was particularly concerned about, because a city like Sebastopol, obviously, they don't have additional funding to say, oh, it's a $2 million project and now it's a $2.4 million project. You don't have an extra $400,000. So really the idea is to at least reduce it so that you have the funding capacity for the project. And a lot of times you don't necessarily know until you go out to bid. You go through the whole process, right? So anyway, so that was the one that I was particularly concerned about. And if there's any opportunity to maybe change that language, I don't know what other people think about that.
it seems like a fairly involved process, going to, the TAC, and then I think the Citizens Advisory Committee, as well as, SCTA board. And I know for a lot of our projects, when we put them in the beginning, sometimes the scope wasn't nailed down all the way, and then it was like 1.5 to 2 years kind of before we found out whether we got the funding. And during that time, it's politics and everything else, things can change. But then also kind of to your point, if there's a project that has like a kind of tight deadline to go to get on the agendas for the different committees and go to the board, I think, to have more flexibility, I guess, to make it more feasible, I think is one of our, major concerns.
Okay, so as the Go Sonoma programs are competitive, and our onus has become significantly more in reporting back to the public how those funds are being spent. So because in Measure M, the projects were already identified, the voters approved the projects, right? And so scope changes in there were generally we're generally allowed as long as they fit within the original description of the project. But that's not how Go Sonoma was written. That's not how Go Sonoma was approved. So we now have a heavier burden to bear in order to make sure that the public is getting what they voted for. And it's been made clear to us from the Citizens Advisory Committee and the board that they would like a more rigorous process. So I hear the concerns. I'm not sure that SCTA staff is interested in preventing any of these projects from occurring. We selected them for a reason, but we do have a responsibility to get that information back to the decision makers because it was a competitive program. So I'm interested in suggestions on how we might, if you have suggestions on how to change this or consider making it somehow easier to do without losing that information presentation to the decision makers, I'm interested.
One thing that I would add, maybe as the first doorway to go through, is that the scope changes are the reasons why you have scope changes here, instead of going through a big, long, convoluted, tedious task of going through the CAC. And it could be as simple as we can only afford to build 400 feet of sidewalk instead of 1,000 feet of sidewalk. So is that really a fundamental scope change, or is it a response to funding?
I will say,
We've gone into, we had to do an ISMND, so it took another year of environmental work to do. So our environmental costs just doubled. We need more money. How do we address that, I guess? And I understand wanting to go to the CAC, but maybe you can shorten this up a little bit by having some review, because that's the purpose of the TAC, is to review these kinds of things and make recommendations back up to the board, rather than going through sorry to say it, a local assistance process now. It feels like we're getting there.
not quite. I will say that we do require quarterly reporting. So the idea that it would be a surprise a year later if you had to do an ISMND we should know that already, right? At which point, if you are working with SCTA and doing your quarterly reporting the way that you're supposed to, then everyone should be on the same page, and it shouldn't be that big of a burden to go through the process and have staff champion your project change at the Citizens Advisory Committee. The Citizens Advisory Committee is tasked with oversight of the measure. There's no getting around it. So that has to happen.
And I should note, the idea is that you'll be working with staff to kind of talk about the reasons for these scope changes and flesh out, is it a major change, is it a minor change, so that we can have that ready before you have to go through any committees. If it's a minor change, we wouldn't be bringing it to the TAC or CAC. If it's something where bids came in high and, we need to decrease the scope slightly, I think we would probably consider that a minor scope change. If it's a radical change in the project scope from a widening and traffic signal project to a roundabout, that's a pretty major change. And so that's something that we need to develop more information and go through committee process to make sure that we're okay with that change. So I think it's really something that we're going to have to play this case by case and come up with a process. We're trying to lay this out as clear as we can in the policy, but it does leave some wiggle room for staff to work with you all to try to sort this out and make it so that you can still deliver your project. We don't want to, as Sean mentioned, to punish you or make it hard to deliver projects. We want to get these projects built. It's just a matter of if we have a big change in the scope, we really have to make sure that we're okay with that before we move forward.
Is there any language in the, I don't remember seeing language in the current proposed amendment that talked about a minor versus a major change. Is there?
There is one
Maybe I
section,
missed it.
there is one section that talks about minor scope changes won't be considered. And, you know, that's like at discretion of staff.
And so minor scope change was purposely not defined to make it a little bit more flexible. Is that the reason why? I mean, which is fine with me, by the way, but I'm just wondering.
I think to David's point of on a case by case basis, but we need to have guidance for when things come in that are significantly different than what was evaluated when we did the original application.
And I think it's to everyone's benefit for us not to make that difference in black and white.
I gotcha. Wink, wink. Okay. I guess, you know, we had an issue on Bodega Avenue because it was, you know, we had tried to get funding for that for such a long time. And the original scope was to go from, you know, I think it was from High Street all the way to Pleasant Hill. But after we went through the process, you know, because it took so long, first we got OBAG, you know, how OBAG is. And so that took a long time. And so by the time the funding was secured and you're moving forward, and then there were all kinds of environmental issues, to your point, which you wouldn't think on a road project, but we had it. But in any case, we had to literally cut it in half. And to me, that is, I mean, it doesn't sound minor to me, but because the scope of the actual work was the same, it's just that in order to match the funding, we could only go halfway. Just that example, I mean, for OBAG, that was okay. But for Go Sonoma, if it were Go Sonoma, what would you think? Was that considered minor or is that major? Just asking.
I think it really depends. I mean.
Well, no, that was an actual.
So-
But
it was an
I
actual.
mean, on David's side, just as an example, so you cut out 400 feet of sidewalk.
Mhm.
But is that a gap closure that was intended as part of the scope of work saying, hey, we're gonna create this contiguous sidewalk and now you're gonna continue to have a gap in it?
Mhm.
Or is it just not replacing new with an existing? I mean, there's so many different factors on what would make it a major versus
Yeah.
not a major.
As an example, I mean, we do ask that your projects are semi-modular or scalable when we do the application process. There are a number of projects in Cotati and Sonoma where they said, we're gonna do some or all of these locations. We're gonna do pedestrian and bike improvements in these various locations, for example, in these locations.
Mhm.
And once they get the money, there's not enough money to do all of those, so then you scale it down. They're still doing what they said they're gonna do, they're just doing it at fewer locations. That seems like a minor scope change that is acceptable and just kind of cruises on through. Again, if you're, like Larry said, if you were supposed to have gap closure and then you're not having a gap closure, that I think is significant.
Mhm.
But we will know that, right? You guys will be working with us. We will, it's not that we won't take this to the board and recommend a scope change. It's that we need to know about it and it needs to be vetted. And this is the process that we're proposing.
I guess I was, you know, there are those situations and it's happened, you go out to bid, right? And that does happen.
Yeah, and just to
Like
use
contingency in it,
Craig's
right?
project as an example, the city of Cotati went out to bid for their sidewalk gap closure project. Bids came in high, so they limited some of the locations. It still mean the intent of the application, and we deemed it a minor scope change, and it's moving forward with the appropriation process. So I think it really just depends on what type of project is it? Does it have a critical gap closure that is needed? Is there something specific in the scope that isn't being achieved by the scope change perhaps?
What about stuff that like isn't, because we're focusing a lot on like cost, but like, for example, the city of Sonoma is working on our project, and it includes a bike path to a school. Well, enrollment's really down, and now all of a sudden that campus is being evaluated to be closed, which means, you know, we might have a path there. Like, we would still like to move forward with it, but like, would a path at another location first, like a school that's definitely not on the docket to be closed? So like, is that considered a minor scope or revision, or like, I mean, how, is there a qualifier for, I mean, I guess it's just really ambiguous because like, for example, that issue I just pointed out is like super different than what we've been talking about in terms of like bid costs. So,
Yeah, and I think it's just still the kind of case by case basis where if you're gonna have a reason like that to not do the path, it makes sense to just do it at another location where you still have the same benefits. And I think that's really what we're trying to emphasize with this process is as long as you're having similar or greater benefits to the original application, we don't have an issue with the scope change.
In that situation, then it would be considered minor and it's just handled at this level, at the TAC level,
Potentially.
potentially, yeah. I don't know what that means.
Or with the quarterly reports.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the idea is that with the quarterly reporting, we're gonna have a heads up. We can have conversations about it before it becomes, you know, the big thing. We can decide how to move forward together as partners.
Would it be helpful at the front end to say, hey, this is a scalable project, there's a chance, good chance if it gets scaled back once the bids come in, and just we can point to that at the end of the process saying, hey, this is what was, we kind of expected this project, and, you know, and then make some argument that, hey, we could scale it back a little bit and still maintain those benefits. That's what we envision and fully expect, and that would help our case, maybe.
I mean, I think so. Yeah, that's the intent is to maintain the benefits proposed in the original application, either maintain them or exceed them.
Well, this,
The
in this,
change.
just the bodega example, I mean, we couldn't really maintain it, right? Because you were going from, you know, one end to another end of the city. And so we couldn't maintain it because you could only go halfway. Now you could maintain it for that halfway,
Well, that's true. So
Yeah.
then you would go through this process.
go
And
through
then
the process and it
Go
would
through
be.
the process of identifying the proposed scope change, providing the information listed, and then we would have a conversation about it. We would take it to the TAC, we would take it to the CAC, and we would take it to the board. That can be accomplished within about a month and a half, maybe 2 months, if we are aware. If from the point that you do your quarterly reporting and we're alerted to it, to the time that you need the vote would be, you know, shorter than it would be within that next quarter.
Would there be an option to take it into phases? Like, for example, when you say it's minor, it goes to the TAC. If it's another level of in between a minor and major, then it can go to the CAC. Anything beyond that? If you're not asking for additional funding, you know, is there, and I'm just thinking to get to the board sometimes just takes, I mean, I understand that.
We can usually turn something around in a month to get to the board. That's faster than most city councils.
To me, it seems the wording using minor and major, it's non-measurable tangibles. What's minor to me could be a full-blown major for you and vice versa. Can't we streamline it in a sense of what is the scope change you mean exactly to consider it? It's like if you deviate from, let's say you're asking to do paving and all of a sudden you want to do tree cutting. That's totally change scope that you're doing something. But if I'm going to reduce the thing, I just want to reduce it to fit my budget. And I don't think so that is, any agency should be penalized not to do so or exercise that option. Given the fact we have 9 cities, they're not like the size of Sonoma County who has more funds, or the city of Santa Rosa. because it's a big deal to them, which I feel. So it's the wording, minor and major. It's my concern. It's non-tangible numbers.
So we're trying to leave this as flexible as possible. But we do have a responsibility to the public.
Yeah, but. if you
I think it's in our
identify-
advantage, yeah, to have it.
You identify what is the issues exactly that the parameters you want, and that's a clear cut then, major and minor, because Mr. A and Miss B in the public, they see this is major, no, I see it minor, no, I see it major. So it's gonna be a lot of pushback, and no matter what you do, the public, they're not gonna be happy anyway, 100%, cannot please everybody. Just if you have a well-defined to those two definitions, minor and major, or remove them and put them in a different column with what exactly the scope of work.
Well, so we determine, right? Like if we're working with you, we would determine, so for example, if I'm like, well, Shauna, I can't build my trail at Sasserini, right? But I'm gonna put it's here. And you're gonna say, oh, well, that's a minor scope revision, or right? Because I'm not technically reducing anything. I mean, that's something we would make internally, right? Or does that still have to go through this whole process if it's a minor scope
If
change?
it's a minor scope change, then it's done at the staff level.
And that's something we would discuss.
Yes.
Okay.
But I think the issue was, you don't know if it's minor or major, there could be disagreement, and, you know, so that was, I think that's what you were getting at. There's just.
So if I can just read the text of the proposed policy, it has a little bit on this. Minor scope changes are those that stay true to the project proposed in the application with little or no impact on project benefits, strong public support, or increase the benefits of the project. If SCTA staff denies approval of the minor scope change request, the requesting agency may resubmit the scope change request as a major scope change for the board's consideration. So as long as you're fulfilling the original intent of the application, we would probably consider it a minor app.
So if I may go back to the Tony's example, the bodega. They're not gonna do it from A to Z. They wanna stop at M. It meets everything, but they're not doing the entire 9 yards. So that should be considered below minor even. So minutia type of things.
I'd like to think that, but.
That's what I just heard, what he read.
But then again, too, if it is major, then it's additional month or two in a process where you make the case that it is an acceptable,
Well, and it's.
correct? I mean, it's not like it's going into an abyss, it's just an extra step that's major.
Yeah, there's some timing issues, so.
Yeah.
With your scenario, you have to award a contract.
Yeah, 60 days, I think, or so.
What your time frame is to make awards after you receive bids, and all that, but there are some.
That's true. It's, if you're getting it after you get your bids.
How about special circumstances, like with that, if something's determined to be major, if there's severe budget constraints and there's just nothing, your hands are tied, maybe we can list some exceptions. But the other point was, are we asking for the board for an up or down on this? Or is it advisory? Can we just bring this before and say, this is an FYI? There's a major scope change, due to this, and this.
We're asking for approval from the board.
Do we have to? Like we could can we make it advisory? Just, we're doing our part because we're keeping them in the know, right? Apprised of it, but it doesn't require a vote.
I mean, SCTA board is the decision maker on all things measure. And they're advised by the TAC and the CAC.
Yeah.
I don't know that I can really make it an advisory measure. I don't think so.
In the
like
proposed
or
text,
receiving
we're
funds.
asking the advisory committees for review and comment prior to the board consideration. So we're not necessarily asking the CAC to vote on this. It just says review and comment in the policy.
Right. And even if they don't like it, it doesn't mean that staff won't continue to support it. It just means that they have to have the opportunity to review and comment before it goes to the board.
Is there the same level here at the TAC, Shauna, too? Two projects, TAC goes, yeah, if we think that's major, and you need to go get thumbs up from whoever, and there's another one, same type of project, but that day we all had shakies or something and decided it was a minor change.
I like that.
So,
Well, I think if it's a minor change, it's not gonna go to them anyway.
to the TAC. Is that gonna come here or not?
The minor changes would just go straight to the board.
So
They do.
you guys are the first level of review, whether it's what kind of change it is. Do you take a major change review to the TAC first to get
Yes.
any kind of input?
Yes. I mean,
I
it
think
will,
that's
it would,
valuable.
by first, I mean, it's gonna go to, it's gonna go to everybody. We're gonna propose it and TAC is first on the list. But it's not like I'm gonna go to the TAC, see what the TAC says, and then go back and reevaluate and then come through again. That what's gonna happen is we're either gonna at a staff level, we're gonna decide this is a minor scope change, at which point we make that decision and David and I end up taking that to the board as an FYI. Or if we decide that it's a major scope change and then the project sponsor provides the information to us, then we take it to the TAC, we take it to the CAC, and then we take it to the board with a staff recommendation of approval or rejection.
And if it is rejected, you're pretty far down the road, right? Like you put it out to bid, you've mobilized resources,
Yeah.
and then what? You get $1 million ripped out of the budget?
I can't imagine that happening, but there's no crystal ball. I
Seems like
guess
something
on that example too, Craig's example, a lot of times you've already expended funding, right? You did your design environmental and it's like, okay, if they don't approve anything and it's.
Ready to go.
Presumably staff is working with your
Yeah.
board members too, so that they can champion this at the board also.
The preference is to be resolved at the lowest level, not to get.
Sure,
whatever
I agree.
it
Yeah,
is.
it just gets political at that
Yeah,
point. I just
exactly.
think this.
But once politics comes
Yeah.
in,
Just take a shot about. Staff is gonna make the recommendation on what a major scope change is, whatever it is, right? And I think what I'm suggesting is maybe let the TAC participate in that decision on what a major scope change is. If I don't know, because this group may see what you consider to be a major scope change as a minor one and would not go to this level of ask the board of CAC. I don't know if that's a doable compromise here, but from my perspective, I think there's a lot of value in this group's thoughts about what scope is, what's a major change, what's not a major change, that I think could benefit you guys in going through this process. And I don't know if this is a huge deal or a tiny little thing that we have lots of red ink on, but.
Let me ask a clarification question. Are you asking only for things that staff are proposing as major changes to come to the TAC?
So a project comes in, then let's just use yours. You want to change the project location to the other side of town. Is that a major scope change? You guys think it is, so you bring it here and we all kind of look at each other and you talk about it and we say, I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with you today, Shauna. So how do we handle it? I think there's value in here that can help you guys go through this process. And, I don't think it's going to be a lot, but
Takes the burden off of you. To personally, I mean, takes the burden off of you, puts it on the group basically to help determine.
Well, we do have more staff that we would take it to. I mean, if it was up to, if it came down to it, this is the kind of thing that we would discuss with planning and we would discuss with, transit. And I mean, whoever is involved, we have our own internal specialists.
The value in.
And I'm not discounting the tax value at all.
We are all the people who are, not people, but we're submitting all the projects at the beginning. So if there's a scope change, I think it should be brought to this group to identify whether that's an acceptable minor or major scope change, if it's a major one or not, because we're kind of competing with each other for the original projects anyway, right?
So
Wouldn't it be a benefit to hear that?
I'm envisioning a requirement where the TAC reviews all the quarterly reporting that's done. Because you're adding a layer, right? I'm proposing that staff makes a decision and it's either minor or major, and that's in coordination with the sponsor. We're presumably having a back and forth each time you do your quarterly reporting, right? So you're either gonna tell me about it beforehand, or it's gonna show up in your quarterly reporting. And then we're either going to have a decision about a major or minor scope change, or, you know, it's gonna move, it's not, it's not we're either. We are going to have a decision about a major or minor scope change. At that point, you're suggesting that I bring it here to the TAC and let you all decide, or help us decide, if it's a major or minor scope change. And then presumably there's a decision, and then we go back, and if it is a major scope change, then we have to go through that process of writing a staff report and going through the TAC and the CAC and the board. Or we can have it where there's a coordination between staff, and then if at some point we decide that creating taking sidewalks and bike lanes out and just doing, something else is a major scope change. I mean, it's either going to be a major scope change or it's not, but I'm losing my train of thought. I'm losing my argument here, but
It's major, but it's
right. That's my proposal. That's what's being proposed right now.
And it seems like if like in the case of Sonoma, that's something that would be known before it gets bid, before it's fully designed. It would be in the quarterly. And so everyone could know about it. And if it becomes an issue, that can come here. The other scenario that you guys were talking about, that's a much bigger deal. If it becomes, everything's fine, bids come in. And holy crap, you've got your window to do that, to get it to TAC and to get it to the CAC.
Yeah.
Basically means you're rejecting all bids, because the chance of getting there in time is, doesn't mean you will. There's a huge risk of having to reject all bids, in which case you lose a construction window perhaps, and cost, that could be a bad scenario.
Yeah.
But that may be a risk that is just there that we've got. You do the same with federal funding and your resolution of support, and
State funding.
you're committing to pay for that.
Well, it's
We
just.
just like measure, Go Sonoma to be easier.
Right. Right.
That doesn't have to be written into here. But it's taken to the TAC. That can just be an internal policy. Procedure.
Yeah, Sean, I think
Procedure.
it's the only scenario I envision us in what I proposed is they don't agree with you about that it's a major change. You guys look at the scope change and we go, that's not major. We'd like to bet this someplace, right? So, and I think the betting place should be here first.
Absolutely.
And I think that would help you guys, I think, take the next steps. If you have the backing of Sonoma didn't believe this was a major scope change. They thought it was minor. Staff disagrees and the TAC disagree for these reasons. And then you go forward, right? Or the TAC said, you know what, we kind of agree with them. And here's why. These are, after hearing what they put on the table, this might be, we really do believe it's a minor change.
So
maybe it would truncate that whole process for you guys if you took that little intermediary step to get that input.
So is there a suggestion of change in the text that David read just moments ago? Are you proposing a change in that text?
And before you answer that, can I ask a question? We're here today to vote to approve this change before it goes to the CAC in a few days, correct?
That's correct.
And if the TAC as a whole doesn't vote for this, it's still going to the CAC in a few days.
That's correct.
Is there opportunity for those who wish to add outside of this meeting today, or today is now in the time to make revisions?
So I would suggest that if there was significant change proposed, that we would include that representation to the Citizens Advisory Committee when we make the presentation. If the TAC, any of the TAC members wanted to attend the Citizens Advisory Committee for this item to argue why that is, the case. I think that would be a great forum. We would represent, and if there was significant controversy, I think that David and I would talk to James and consider whether or not it's going to the board, or we would pull the item, or, if it's not what we're looking for.
Okay, so.
But I think, my proposal is this is being proposed to the TAC, to the CAC, and to the board in the next 2 weeks.
That makes perfect sense. So the options really are, if you have comments now to give to Shauna, she can add, modify before it goes to the CAC with extra lines or notes or however you do it. Or if people go back to their offices today, you're all going back to your office, you're not going home, and work on this. And then you put together some language, the same thing, you would send it to her, but you most likely would be requested to go to the CAC to kind of plead your case if it's not incorporated, or
I would like to have consensus
SCTA
from the TAC. I would like to represent it as consensus.
as
from
all the TAC and not just one person.
Correct.
Okay, that makes it more difficult.
Mr. Chair, if I may, we do have an existing Go Sonoma policy 4-11 that does say when we have disputes between STA and a project sponsor, we bring it to the TAC for their expertise to weigh in. So we already have kind of a dispute resolution process built in.
Okay.
Can I just clarify? So are you suggesting that it would, if staff determines it is a major scope change, it comes here first, we basically say yes or no, we agree or we don't agree. And then from there, would it have to then go back through that process, TAC, CAC, if it is a major scope change, it's now, we're forwarding it directly to the CAC and to the board. So it's already kind of, we're not adding an extra layer of review. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, the way I'm reading this right now, even if it's a minor change, you go through every one of those steps.
Yes, but but the TAC now has the ability to basically block things from going to the board. You're saying if we do not agree with staff's assessment, that is a major.
What I'm not reading here, I guess, is what I'm responding to. It doesn't say minor changes won't go to this step. Scope changes will go through this step. Right?
We can write
So
that
I
in.
guess that's one point of clarification, Shauna, that a minor scope change made by staff won't go through this revision policy that goes for the CAC.
I think that's dealt with at quarterly reporting, that at some point we go, hey, this is kind of a big deal, or yeah, we totally agree with you. And then if we kind of go, oh, that's really kind of a big deal, I think we're looking for some information. If you want to move forward with this, then we're going to ask for these things.
And that's where I think the TAC can add some value to. Is it even whatever you guys bring in here, with talking to James and whoever else here and you guys like the vet stuff with, I think the TAC has some input that probably would be valuable on that conversation before you go through this whole process.
And it sounds
There's a
like that's.
dispute, you're saying.
Well, major changes are gonna go through this process, right? Minor changes, now I better understand them. So minor changes aren't going to get us this level. So we're always talking about major changes. I guess my concern is how we're defining what major changes are. Right? So I think there may be difference of opinion here of what a major change is. Maybe not. I mean, it may turn out that way. We may all go, damn, Sean, that's right. Yeah.
I feel like the language outlined here where it says, stay true to the project proposed, little or no impact on benefits, strong public support, do not increase or increase the benefits is seems pretty straightforward. I would agree with that language.
Yeah, I do too.
What defines major versus minor.
In like a major dispute, when you bring it to the board, if we had a disagreement with your assessment of the project, would you bring it as staff's assessment, TAC assessment? Would you present it as different, or will we be swaying? Will our case sway your assessment?
So David mentioned that there is a dispute resolution policy already. If at some point we say, we really feel that this is a major scope change, and you guys go, nope, we don't think so, then you invoke 411 and say, we want it to go to the TAC. You've got that kind of time, great, then we'll do it that way and we'll get the tax input and then we'll come back and make a decision.
And then I think part of what you're asking is, I assume the TAC opinion, if we all vote on it, we say it's minor, staff says it's major. You would present that as part of what goes to the board, saying this went to the TAC. And
Yes,
so it would be
absolutely.
voiced there.
Yes,
At
absolutely.
minimum as a sentence within the.
Yes, that's how it will be
board.
voiced.
Yes,
Correct.
absolutely.
How about this? So under A, where it says scope changes to competitive Go Sonoma projects. You've got an agency requesting a scope change must submit a request to SCTA that includes the following. Then it goes into the whole list, right?
Mhm.
How about we say something like, if SCTA staff can't even read my own writing. Well, I just say flags a scope change from review of the quarterly report that may be interpreted or as a major scope change, then it does all this.
I mean, I think I would like to say that I have every expectation that we're gonna be having multiple conversations about this. It's not just gonna come out of left field that we think you've just, you submit quarterly reporting and suddenly you're finding yourself in front of the TAC defending your project. I mean, we're gonna have a conversation where you're gonna be able to tell me and or staff what the change is and why you think it's major or minor. And we're gonna have a discussion. And I mean, I don't think it's gonna be a surprise, but if I go, man, that really sounds like a big scope change, can you please provide me some of this other information so that I can help make my decision whether or not it needs to be elevated?
Yeah, minor or major, it seems like any scope change, even no matter how minuscule, would trigger this process.
No.
As written, okay.
That's not the way I'm seeing it. And if you guys are proposing a change, I think it says it in here that minor scope changes will not be considered. Or that, staff are doing it at
That's
the.
later, but like, hey,
No.
this is an agency requesting a scope change.
Maybe that first sentence should say the SCTA will consider major changes to the approved scope.
It seems like that informal process needs to be the first line here.
Or you could just title A as major scope changes to.
But then we're making a determination it's major, and then that project's toast, right?
I think
No,
the issue is.
it's not toast.
No.
I need you guys
I
to
mean-
understand that this is not gonna kill your project. It's just, we're just asking for some more information.
David, you're about to say.
I was just gonna say, whether it's a minor change or a major change, we need information to be able to make that call on whether it's minor
Right.
versus major. If it's just, you say it's minor and we don't have information, we can't make that decision just based on
Right.
what you say.
David, you're supposed to trust us.
Is all this information under A in the quarterly
So
report?
is there, and sorry, I keep going back because I need to have the
Can we
agenda in
read that
front of me,
line?
but the list of things that are needed. Does it say anything about these are things that might be needed, or if you have, like, to Craig's point, if it's a really minor change, you guys say, hey, you need to show us, which is of course right. They don't necessarily need to go through those whatever number of bullets and all that information. It's just whatever information you need, and this is a sample of what could be requested.
I mean,
I don't
We
read
could
it
add those
that way.
words just to have it may include information such as the
There
following.
you go.
because-
Yeah, if you were to do something like that, are you guys okay with that?
Changing it from must to
May,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a difference.
So if David and Sean, if you guys are agreeable to that, I think that solves that problem.
You guys are just front loading all this information so you can decide whether it's a major or minor. And then.
I mean, we're gonna need the information in order to make. the
It's on
decision.
us
This is
to
what we're-
provide the information so they can decide and they can ask us for whatever they want.
Well, there's things in here that's tough to get, evidence of public support for the new scope. I mean, that kind of,
That's time consuming.
yeah,
But that goes back to
Well,
what the
you've done
change
that
is and
already.
whether or not it's
the
needed.
new scope of the new
There's only
scope.
3 of us that are doing quarterly reports, right? 2 or 3 of us?
Well, no, there are more than that because you're reporting on both years. Both years programming are doing quarterly reporting.
So we already do this with the quarterly reports. So, to have something in addition to that, I'm saying is redundant. We could have, this information is provided in the quarterly,
It should be.
so.
But it may not be to the level of detail that we need to.
Right, you might not have changed the public outreach,
We might have Plan
information.
sheets or environmental analysis that we need to look at.
It seems like SCTA,
In the red staplers guys view about what's good enough or what's not good enough in terms of answering questions.
well, it's almost like SCTA staff's
Yeah,
review of the quarterly report may trigger.
yeah. That is how we get to this place, I think.
Well, I mean, or you could just give me a call and say, hey, this might be a problem, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Happens all the time.
Yes.
We always just worry if there's not a continuation of Shauna. 5 years from now.
Don't plan on going anywhere. anytime
So there's that, and then I think the other comment is that gives me heartburn is that we talked about minor, I think I'm okay with being general, and I think that works to our advantage to make it more subjective. But then it says SCTA staff will present recommendations to approve or disapprove major scope changes to the board. SCTA staff may recommend denying a scope change if the request dramatically changes the project's scope and intent from what it was approved. There's no off ramp there. It would be great if there was, unless, there's extenuating circumstances or something, some off ramp.
Well, it's still gonna go before the board. We're not the decision maker, right? We're just making a recommendation, as is the TAC and the CAC, to the board. The board are the decision makers.
Yeah, everybody's putting a rock on the scale though, when projects are presented to the electeds.
But you could be recommending denying it if it dramatically changes, the project scope. I mean, that's pretty strong,
It is.
right? Okay.
We get the policy and flow chart form. Let me get the local assistance procedure manual flow charts.
All right, so where are we? We have one minor change which staff is supportive of.
Was that the May?
Yeah, may include,
And you think?
and we trust, I assume we will trust staff to make that change. What else is there that we need to be able to vote for this at this point? Also with the understanding that additional comments can come in and we can go through that process of someone attending the CAC, but those comments need to go to everyone here because staff would like it to be from this whole committee, which makes it really hard for you just to have your individual comments. Although I'm sure there's probably a way for individuals to speak at the CAC.
Absolutely.
But they're not representing the TAC. You would only be representing your agency.
I would also like to note that the staff report for the CAC has already been written and gone out. So I would have to represent what the TAC wants as part
Verbally.
of my report, my oral report to the CAC. It is not going to be the same. I'm not going to make the change in the staff report because they've already got this language. So I would have to represent to the CAC that this is what the TAC recommends.
Would you present it as this is what the TAC recommends and SCTA staff agrees? Or you're just not even gonna make a comment about that?
I mean,
Well, for example, for the May, we're in agreement, so we would
Yeah,
say we
okay,
agree
you
with this
would.
change.
Okay.
If there's additional input that we don't necessarily agree with, we would indicate that.
Yeah, okay. Can I have just a?
Please,
question?
of course,
You
of
had
course.
You had a good example about the gap change. And, and then you go out to bid and, I can't, complete that gap change. I can do some, but not all. In that situation, let's say you decide, oh, well, that's a major change. And let's say you go through the process and because, say, I don't know, it's a major change and you can't get them to the school, for example. And so, you can get parts of it done. And in that situation, let's say it's denied, but that agency has already gone through design and environmental and expended the money, assuming that there's going to be funding that's going to be reimbursed for that. And if it's denied, then I guess that's all at risk. Is there an opportunity to say,
I cannot imagine a scenario where we would deny a project that is, I mean, unless we were
let's say
particularly
let's
at
say
odds.
yeah, let's say it
I
is.
mean, I can't imagine.
I
You were
can't.
falsifying
You guys
your
really see us
quarterly
as villains.
reports or
Yeah,
something
but
like that.
I mean, yeah.
No, I mean, no, I'm just saying that you go out to, well, you go out to bid and then, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's, the estimate is just way lower than, what the bids came
I
in.
mean,
I'm just sitting what the low bid is. And so I'm just putting out a scenario. I'm not saying how
And
likely it's gonna happen. I'm just saying, here's a scenario.
I understand, but I would also say that SCTA wants these projects to be delivered. We are gonna work with staff in every situation to try to move these projects forward. I cannot imagine a time, unless we were significantly at loggerheads, where we would deny a recommendation. We would say, no, we don't. Because, I mean, you still have the opportunity, even if we deny it, to take it to the board for consideration.
Right.
Right? It's not just up to us. We are not the decision makers. We are making a recommendation. If we deny your scope change request, then you still, in this language, still have the opportunity to go to the board anyway.
Then I guess you plead your case that, hey, we expended
right.
design
And
and
you have your
environmental and.
Political
That's right.
person
Please
doing
give us
their work.
that.
Right. But I
Say
can't
they'll do a
imagine
follow-up
that
project.
that staff would ever want that to happen.
It goes that far south.
Wild card's
It
the
would-
CAC, right?
Yeah.
You might be bringing it forward for approval against the CAC recommendation
And
of
but we
disapproval.
can be at the CAC too to say, hey, all right, we can only do half of it, but we'll have a follow-on project.
Right, down the road.
To, yeah.
When we get more
when we get
funding.
funding, and then when.
I think the
when we
bottom
do it
line,
again.
yeah, exactly. The bottom line, I think there's always gonna be some risk, but
Yeah.
with this group, it's
Yeah.
probably relatively minimal.
Just crack the checkbook, Sean. You're gonna change it.
Voter tax dollars, just blank check, sure.
Take it out of Sonoma County's portion.
Prior to this was.
They got a fancy new building. They must be rolling it over there.
There's no formal procedure prior to this.
That's correct.
We did have a kind of a understanding under Measure M that if you had like savings from one phase, we'd move it to another. We didn't talk about that portion of the scope of the policy changes, but for savings, we had kind of an informal understanding how those would.
So prior to this, it wouldn't even been considered.
Yeah, prior to this, the projects were identified in Measure M in the ballot language, and so the ballot language was rather vague. So what was the project was kind of left up to interpretation. So this is trying to formalize this for the new competitive Go Sonoma process.
And ultimately, I don't think we denied a scope change in any situation. I mean, there have been a number of scope changes. And in the example of Santa Rosa Farmers Lane, we did an expenditure plan amendment for a scope change to change the route. I mean, it was done. We didn't deny it. We did just, I mean, it was kind of, but David's right. We had projects that were identified. The voters had already approved those projects. So it was less up for debate, but as a competitive program, we have a responsibility to ensure that we are delivering what we approved when we did the evaluation.
Okay. So are we prepared to vote? Does anyone object to voting? I'm not trying to cut anyone off from speaking anymore. So if there are more questions or comments, please. But I think we're kind of at that point. All right. All in favor with the language as is with that one minor change? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay.
It's funny how one minor change.
Question for staff. Were you expecting that one to?
I was expecting it to be me,
Okay.
yes.
Good.
I'm glad I didn't do.
Thank you, everyone. That was good conversation. Onward to 6.4, Measure M and Go Sonoma primer informational item.
It is in there. So Drew is going to bring up my presentation real quick. Up here so I can look through it. Just give me a second. I should have done that earlier, but. There it is. Okay, so I'm hoping to do this without putting anybody to sleep. Many of you will know this information, but there's been a lot of staff turnover. There's been, some changes in procedure like we were just talking about. So I wanted to make sure that everybody was on board with what the requirements are for both of the measure programs. So this is just a comparison. Hopefully, I'm not going to put you to sleep. Please tell me if you are, if it gets to be too repetitive. So just as a primer, Measure M has two types of programs that involve you all. There's the apportionment programs where a percentage share of the tax proceeds is distributed with an allocation formula directly to the recipients. And then there's the project-specific program where projects were identified in the ballot measure itself, including the amount of funding for each project. Next slide, please, Drew. So in Go Sonoma, there are sort of two of the same programs, but the first one is an apportionment program where you get a larger share of tax proceeds distributed by the allocation formula. And then there's the competitive program rather than the project-specific program. And the program parameters for the competitive program are defined per program in the measure, where each project is evaluated on its ability to address criteria in a given funding cycle. Next slide, please, Drew. Sorry. Measure M cooperative agreements, right? So Measure M requires cooperative agreements. For the apportionment program, a cooperative agreement is required between each recipient and SCTA prior to the collection and disbursement of funds. It's only one agreement for the life of the measure. You'll never have to do it again. You do it at the beginning and then you don't do it again ever. So there was one in 2005 that each jurisdiction approved, and that was it. For the project-specific programs, cooperative agreement is required for each project listed in the measure, and the agreement is approved by the recipient's governing body before being considered for approval by the SCTA. Next slide, please, Drew. For Go Sonoma, a cooperative agreement is required between each of the recipients and the SCTA prior to collection, same as Measure M, and the agreement is approved by the recipient's governing body before being considered for approval by the SCTA. Same. For the cooperative agreement for the competitive programs, there is a cooperative agreement for each project selected prior to eligibility for reimbursement. The agreement by the recipient's governing body before being considered. And if project phases are separated by a number of years, more than one co-op might be needed. So because it's a competitive program, because there's about 4 years between each call for projects, it's possible that phase one of a project goes through in the SCTA funding program cycle 1, and then there's a phase 2, but it's a different location. It's 4 years later. It's kind of separate. So we might end up doing a second cooperative agreement, even though the jurisdiction may be calling it phase 1 and phase 2 of the same project. That'll be case by case, and we'll kind of decide that in partnership with you all. Next slide, please, Drew. For Measure M appropriations, there is no appropriation requirement for the apportionment program. So we just do, you sign the cooperative agreement, and then we just do quarterly payments. Those checks come straight to you and you bank them or spend them as you see fit. That's it. For the project-specific programs in Measure M, an appropriation is required for each developmental phase of the project: environmental design, right-of-way construction. An appropriation must be submitted at least 30 days prior to the board meeting at which it was to be considered. An appropriation must be approved by the SCTA board prior to commencement of reimbursement. An appropriation may be made in the year prior to the fiscal year in which the funding is programmed, but reimbursement would not occur until the programmed fiscal year. So let's say you have a summer construction season, you want to go to construction in May, then we would take your appropriation request early in April or May, and then you would have that appropriation approved, but it would probably be for reimbursement starting in July. So you would have your authorization, you would have your secured funding, but you wouldn't ask for reimbursement until July 1. Okay. Or the other option is advancement of funds for future reimbursement is also possible with a request letter submitted to the SCTA to be approved by the executive director. I believe Healdsburg did this for Foss Creek Trail, where they said, we're just going to move forward. We want to do it sooner than when it's programmed. So they sent us a letter. They went to construction. They submit, at that point, they're submitting invoices as though they were getting reimbursement. And then we reimburse when the funds are programmed, everything that we've been invoiced for up until that point. But it's a slightly different process than just going a little early. Any questions? That's all Measure M. Next slide, please, Drew. Go Sonoma appropriations. Again, apportionment program does not require an appropriation. Ashley, you look puzzled.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so Measure M is what we're currently under, right? And then Go Sonoma is coming up.
That's right.
Gotcha. Okay.
Go Sonoma starts. So Go Sonoma was passed by the voters in November of 2020. It starts collection on April 1st of 2025.
So Go Sonoma, the way I think of it is Go Sonoma is essentially Measure M rebranded.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
But
yeah,
as we've talked about, there are some differences between the programs competitive and project specific. So
right.
Up till this point, and because the reporting is different, we have been referring to them separately. Staff has. But yes, you are correct. It is a continuation of the quarter-cent sales tax measure, rebranded as Go Sonoma.
Okay. So
and a new expenditure plan.
Okay.
And the apportionments you said are going to be larger than they were.
That's right.
Okay.
So the formula hasn't changed, but the percentage of the measure that goes to the apportionment programs has changed. So there was a larger portion of funding that's going to the roads and transit programs under Go Sonoma than there was under Measure M.
So when we do our next Measure M quarterly reporting, it's Go Sonoma reporting quarterly.
Never
reporting.
required quarterly reporting for Measure M. There
Sorry, not
is no
quarterly
quarterly
reporting.
reporting.
Annual reporting. Sorry.
Annual reporting.
Okay.
And I'm getting to that part. This part is just about appropriations, but the reporting part is later. I know it's a lot and there's a lot of redundancy, so I apologize. But the project specific programs are very similar. You need to do an appropriation for each of the developmental phases. The appropriation is submitted at least 30 days. The appropriation request is submitted at least 30 days prior to the meeting where you want it considered. The appropriation must be approved by the SCTA before commencement of reimbursement. And then those other two options that we talked about are also applicable in Go Sonoma. Next slide, please, Drew. Measure M annual reporting. For the apportionment programs, reporting for both of the apportionment programs is due on September 15th of each year. The instructions and frequently asked questions are on the SCTA website. There's a link there. Hopefully everybody knows where those live. Reporting should include the 4 quarterly disbursement amounts received for fiscal year and how that funding was spent. We usually try to send out a reminder letter that shows what those quarterly disbursements were so that they're easier to track. Reporting should include a description of the activities, locations, and distances of the improvements. For example, X linear feet were striped or X many miles of roadway paved. If reporting on paving, reporting should include PCI of the roadway paved before and after paving. Reporting should include before and after photos of the improvements made, if possible. Photos should be in GIF or JPEG format. I get a lot of PDFs and Word documents with photos inserted. I cannot use those in the annual report. It happens pretty much across the board. I'm not trying to single anybody out. I'm just saying I gotta have them in GIF or JPEG, otherwise I can't use them in the annual report. So we do request that they come in that format. Reporting should include an increase or decrease in the jurisdiction's overall road miles. I did mention this a couple of meetings ago, but the road miles is part of your formula, right? If your road miles go up, you should tell me because it's going to change how much money you get. Alternatively, if your road miles go down, you should tell me because it's going to change how much money you get. But it's not an NA type of question. I get that a lot on the annual reports. It's a yes or no question. So please let me know if your road miles have changed. And then reporting for transit should include the total number of riders for a fiscal year and increase or decrease in ridership as a percentage over the previous year. We don't have any transit folks in the room, but thought I'd include that anyway. Next slide, please, Drew.
Question on
Sure
the
thing.
slide. This is for Measure M for the apportionment part. That's gonna end, right? Because we're
Correct.
gonna go into Go Sonoma. So when's the last annual report? Is it next year?
So we're going to be collecting and dispersing funds for Measure M through March 31st of 2025. So in 2025, I will get an annual reporting letter for both Measure M and Go Sonoma. Go Sonoma will probably not have very much on it, but because your disbursement might not even happen in June, so we might not even get one. But there will probably be disbursements past March 31st because the collection will stop, but they have to collect it and then send it to us, at which point we send it to you. So probably still it will just be Measure M next year, and then in 2026 it'll be Go Sonoma. There's a possibility there might be overlap, and we will identify that before you get it.
This is expenditure too, though.
Correct.
So let's say we don't, we'll try to spend it, but we don't spend
say
it
you don't.
till the next, like summer.
Yeah, then you don't have,
August, then you'll be expecting a Measure M report in 2026
yes,
for expenditure.
that is correct.
There are also some Measure M projects that are still around that will keep having to do reporting.
Right, but we're talking about, I think right now. No, this is, yeah, we're on, unless we were on the previous one.
Shauna.
Yeah.
So when I was recently preparing our staff report for the cooperative agreements for Go Sonoma, I found an estimate of the annual funds we should expect for transit and street maintenance. That in the original expenditure plan, I think there was a table. Are there any more recent estimates, or do you provide estimates kind of on an ongoing basis?
We provide those annually, and we are required to provide them to the TAC no later than February 1st of each year.
Okay, that's helpful.
So, and those get posted on our website as well. So should you have a question, you don't remember what it was, they're always posted on our website after we distribute that information.
I have one more quick follow-up question. So if we haven't spent our Measure M money by the time Go Sonoma starts, like we still got like some stragglers, we still have to do a Measure M reporting, right? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, if you have banked money in 2025 that you haven't spent, then yes, we would expect to see an annual reporting letter for 2026. That's correct. Absolutely. Is that where we were reporting? Yeah, so reporting for all project-specific programs is also due on September 15th of each year. Reporting should include all reimbursements for a given fiscal year. This includes the estimates provided before the close of the fiscal year. So when we say, hey, fiscal year is closing, can you get us an estimate for your expenditures before July 6th? Then that estimate should be included in what you anticipated invoicing, or what, in what you are reporting as expended, because you anticipated getting reimbursed for it for that fiscal year, right? Does that make sense? Got everybody on? Okay, good. A reporting letter for each project developmental phase is required each fiscal year. So if you have a project and you're getting money in right away and construction and a single fiscal year, we're going to want to see a reporting letter for each one of those. Reporting should include a description of all activities completed in a fiscal year, and if incomplete, what is anticipated the following year. And reporting should include photos before and after, if possible, of improvements or activities accomplished, again, in GIF or JPEG format. Next slide, please, Drew. Very, very similar. Go Sonoma annual reporting. The forms are on the website. They've been updated. Reporting should, because you guys approved those as part of the Go Sonoma Strategic Implementation Plan. So those are available. You don't have to use them yet, but they are available. Reporting should include the quarterly, the 4 quarterly disbursements, the amounts received for the fiscal year. This is for the apportionment programs for Go Sonoma. Reporting should include a description of the activities. If reporting on paving, reporting should include PCI. Reporting should include before and after photos. This is all sort of redundant. I apologize, but just trying to make it clear that the requirements are similar for both Measure M and Go Sonoma. Next slide, please, Drew. Go Sonoma annual reporting for project-specific programs. Reporting for all project-specific programs is due on September 15th of each year. That's the annual reporting. Reporting should include all reimbursements in a given fiscal year. Reporting letter for each developmental phase should include a description of activities and should include photos. Next slide, please, Drew. Go Sonoma, unlike Measure M, has quarterly reporting as well. The quarterly reporting for both project programs is due on the 15th of March, June, September, and December. I have been making an effort to make sure that you get a reminder of that prior to when the reporting period starts. So I'm getting my reminders out either by the 30th or the 1st of that month so that you guys know that, hey, it's time to do this again. Reporting should include all project activities and milestones accomplished over the quarter, as well as milestones and activities anticipated in the following quarter. Schedule and budget should be reported quarterly. And reporting is required so SCTA can have a current project information sheet on the website for transparency to the voters who approve the measure. So once you guys complete your reporting, I go in and I review it because we're using that information to try to keep up to date on your projects, but also because we're printing out that public information sheet and posting it on the website. So the public has a information sheet that is within the last 3 months of, what's going on. It stays current because what's in the strategic implementation plan goes stale the minute it gets printed, right? And it's on paper. So we're trying to make sure that there's something that's more current. Next slide, please, Drew. So this is the matrix. This should be fairly easy. I can hand this out to you or send it as a PDF if you like, but this just shows you, the Measure M program or the Go Sonoma program, whether it's an apportionment program or a project program, whether a cooperative agreement is needed, whether whether an appropriation is needed, when the annual reporting is due, and when the quarterly reporting is due. Questions? No. Next slide, please, Drew. This is the last one, I promise. Measure M and Go Sonoma both have maintenance of effort reporting, which is different than all the other reporting we just talked about. This is due by the end of the year. You guys all have to report out on your SB1 funds for local streets rehab. Everybody should be familiar with that. And that reporting is due in December. So our reporting is due very shortly thereafter. it'd be great if you could submit them at the same time. So I try to make sure that our forms are updated and sent out in December so that you guys all have access to it. You could do it at the same time if you wanted. And just so you know, reporting includes checking one of 2 boxes and a signature. So you're either saying reporting is complete and accurate as it is. We're not asking for any exceptions or adjustments. And then you check that box and sign it. Or you say, I'm requesting review of the claimed adjustments because you've got exceptions that shouldn't be included as part of that overall maintenance of effort amount. If that's the case, then you check that box and sign it and then submit it to us. This is in February. So we do start reporting out on it in February. That's usually when we say that it's due, this is the drop dead date. And it usually takes a while to get it, but you can submit it anytime after December. You're reporting it already to the state, so you might as well report it to us at the same time, but personally, yes, the difference. Got it. That's it. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you, Drew. And I'll be happy to answer any other questions if there are any.
Will you share that PowerPoint?
I will be happy to share that PowerPoint.
Any questions? All right, moving on. Thank you, Shauna. Regional information update, 7.1 inactive federal obligation status informational item.
Inactive obligations. Apologize, it looks like there's only, nope, there they are. There's all 3 of them. So the county got a number of projects taken off their list. Well done. But there are still some left on the list, particularly some that have been languishing. So please do provide me with an updated status. I mean, there's a couple of them that have been on there for a while that are part of DHS or some other county department, but they still need to come off. So,
Oh, I know that.
okay.
I
All
know
right.
you pray for me to finish it.
But we are down to just two jurisdictions on the inactive
Those I
obligations.
cannot remove them because they don't have funds and they refuse to give us.
Right. Those are the bridge projects.
So they want to keep us the winner, Sonoma County. So we only have one competitor, Petaluma. So.
All right. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Item 8, the upcoming SCTA RCPA meeting on October 14th.
I don't have it in Word yet, but I can read to you the items that will be going to the board on the 14th, which include an adoption of a revised environmental policy statement for the green business certification, a legislative update, status and measure reporting letters, and policy amendment scope discussed today. Shauna, what does BBP stand for?
Build bikeways and pathways.
Loan modification related to that program. Appropriation request with potty sidewalk gap closure and cooperative agreement for the Go Sonoma roads and Go Sonoma transit program. And then the State Route 121 8th Street East EA and EV task force order. We're up for consent, and then on regular calendar, a housing policy update from the Napa Sonoma collaborative overview. Quick to build best practices, Go Sonoma transit fare free policy, the fiscal year 26 coordinated plan, and the final budgets for SCTA, RCPA, TFCA, Measure M, and Go Sonoma. And then our related activities as usual.
Thank you.
Are those minor or major changes?
We haven't voted on that yet, Steve.
I'm gonna go there.
Neither.
At 8th Street East, is that what the task order's for?
I mean, eventually.
Gonna make
We
us
haven't done the environmental for it yet, so we can't say for certain, but yes, that's what we've been moving forward on.
Any other questions? Item 9, roundtable discussion. Anyone have anything to share?
Major or minor?
What was that? Major?
Or minor.
We'll accept major, minor, insignificant, humorous, whatever.
In the summer of discontent with environmental agencies, there's a lot of new staff. And I tell you what, they're going right to the checklists and they will not look up and make any professional decision. This is the checklist and we will use it. So, yeah, it's been a messy year for us, trying to get stuff done.
Hmm.
You know, Army Corps, you know, wants motto, you take jurisdiction or you won't, right? He'll tell you he's not gonna. They got some new staff that, I'm not sure, but we're gonna investigate everything. So it's been a tough year, right, Hunter?
Oh, yeah.
That could change significantly in November.
You mean? Could get
That's
worse.
absolutely.
Well, I think that all federal agencies might change their tune in November, depending on the results of the election.
I see. It's state too. Fish and Wildlife has the people who are working on projects who see the same things from us over every year and get different opinions based on how you're working. Which is a little frustrating, but. Or you delay and delay and delay, and then they give you off law, which is, you should just throw the book at us and we'll just do it. It's okay. Just tell us. That's all we want. Just tell us.
I do have one item, Mr. Chair. We were approached by a consultant that wanted to give a presentation to the TAC about rubberized asphalt. We've done that in the past. Does anybody care to have that kind of a presentation at this venue?
I think it was in also regards to the Cal Recycle rubberized tire grant program. I don't know if anyone applied for that when it closed a couple weeks ago, but I think they're trying to show that opportunities out there, and we've talked about it before.
I got a question. Who's used rubberized recently and used the grant?
We haven't done it recently. We did a bunch of it and we got grants for both chip seals and for overlay stuff. So there's a limited amount of money, and once you hit your threshold, you're kind of out of the program. So it's kind of a one and done.
Did the grant compensate the difference from standard hot mix to rubberized?
I don't know what the current unit prices are now, but it was quite a bit cheaper. The thing with asphalt rubber is the testing side of it, especially if you use wet process. Use a wet process, there's some significant testing requirements. If you use terminal blend materials, and it's not so bad. But wet process is fussy. It's better, I think, but it's fussy, so you better have lab staff ready.
Good to know. So does anyone wish to have them present to this group?
Who's the organization? Wants to do that?
I'm sorry, I don't.
It's
have it
probably
right
the
in
same
front of
one
me.
that sends the emails and makes the phone calls. I always forget their name.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up. I don't have it right in front of me.
Email came from someone from Circle Point, but they're doing it on behalf of Cal Recycle.
Okay.
I think
Oh, so it isn't that, it isn't the company that does it, it's the Cal Recycle that's pushing it. Is anyone opposed to them presenting?
Captive audience.
Yeah,
You're a little opposed?
not interested.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Craig has the sole vote. He's the only one who voted one way or the other, so we will not have them.
That's a major one.
Ready to make a decision, Craig?
Already ruled.
No, those who speak get what they want. Anything else?
Oh, can I?
Please.
Yeah, just mention that the city of Sebastopol, I think Mario mentioned it, that they're recruiting for a public works director, city engineer position. So it's hit the streets. So what they're looking for is I guess their public works superintendent is going to retire. They're actually going to reorganize and so when he retires the end of December, they'd like to get somebody on board beginning of the year. So that's the timing of it, but they're accepting applications now. And they're also accepting applications for an engineering tech. And that's a kind of a nice position. It's a new position for them because it's a 1/2. So, they'll get it at, if of anybody good that could qualify at the lower entry level or at a higher level. send them to Sebastopol. It's on their website.
Petaloma's looking for a public works director at the same time.
That's right. And we also.
Gonna pull some of your higher pay, I'm sure.
And we also split our public works and utilities departments are once again split. So
Oh, we're splitting.
we're hiring for two different directors, actually.
Okay.
I lived through the division.
We just submitted HSIP in the last cycle. Our BCR ended up around, it was a little over 25 for citywide signal improvements and safety improvements. And then we also did a PED set aside for a couple of crossing improvements. And then we're working on a couple of applications for our River Trail, US 101 and Smart Undercrossing project that are due in the next, one's due Monday and the other one's due in a couple of weeks. So.
Sounds good. And those who have the ATP through Dana and SCTA, what's the status of, I think Tati's done? You're finished with your active transportation plan?
Oh, we are, yeah, it got adopted like in April, May, something like that. Which is useful because we can rely on it for justifying current projects.
Yeah, we're going through ours, so probably won't be final approved till January or so.
Just a word of caution or just lessons learned with our Highway 116 intersection improvement project. We're getting a lot of public input. Somebody pointed out that there's a Caltrans bike plan and they will show up improvements in your jurisdiction. And we just were not aware of those. And we have two in our jurisdiction, so it's going to wrap that into your outreach and justification process too.
Yeah, I'd never heard of the Caltrans bike plan.
Yeah, I had never heard before. So
Covers all state routes.
they're fairly minor improvements like striping and maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we only have the 101. We don't have any state routes, so it's probably nothing for us, but it's still interesting.
Something to look at.
Anything else?
I did have something for the county, and that is, we've been working with Johannes. He's busy these days. And there's a project, Regal Road West County Trail. And we switched it from the city being the lead to the county being the lead. I don't know if he mentioned that to you. And so I don't know if, and that's because the city did their portion, which was, that's the bodega portion of it was pretty much done. And so, so there's other portions on mostly county jurisdiction. And so I was wondering if there's any active movement of putting it on some kind of a grant list of some sort.
I'm not familiar with that project, so I
Okay.
don't have that file here.
You're not, okay, thought I'd mention it. Maybe you could,
There's a bunch of teams that are.
Yeah.
approved that might be on a different team.
I see.
Could be the section.
This is a bike, bike project, so. But anyway. Okay.
All right, 318. Yes, you may. You don't have to go back to the